I think we can start with a brief introduction of ourselves. My name is Li Qi. I'm current CAAM Fellow, and I'm also the producer of a feature-length documentary entitled Religion in School, and I'm going to pass it to Rafael.
Great, thank you, Lily. Hello, everybody. My name is Rafael Batanga. I'm a Filipino-Alaskan filmmaker originally from Kodiak, Alaska. And I am currently working on a film called Magsayawan Ketchikan, which is based out of Ketchikan, Alaska.
Hello, my name is Khaled Ghunim, and I'm originally from Chicago, and I am currently working on my first feature-length film titled Traces of Home, which follows the journey of me returning to Mexico and Palestine to find my parents' original homes. And just before we go deeper, I did want to do a little bit of a land acknowledgement, as it's very important for us to ensure that we are preserving the memory of the land that we have the honor of being on today is occupied territory, originally from the Ohlone land. So just wanting to acknowledge where we are seated and that we have this privilege to be here. Thank you.
Is this? No. Oh. Sorry, everyone. My name is Tadashi Nakamura. I'm the director of the Media Arts Center at the Japanese American National Museum. Also co-directed and produced with Wing Wen Lei, a documentary feature that's having its Bay Area premiere today at 5 o'clock. It's called Nobuko Miyamoto, A Song and Movement.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bobbin. I was actually a consulting producer on Q, which is screening, I believe, right after this, and have the privilege of working with Colette as a mentor, and also a co-director of Youth FX and Next Doc, so excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Diane Kwan, and I'm originally based in Chicago, but for this past year living here in San Francisco. And I'm so proud to be here with Lily and Colette from Chicago. I forgot who said give it up for Midwest, but and I'm a producer of different projects. At CAAM, I'm the executive producer of Home Court, which is going to be tomorrow at 12:30, and the executive producer of Taste of Mango, which is at 5:30, and the consulting producer for Above and Below the Ground, which is happening now, sadly. So happy to be working with the three fellows.
All right, well, thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. I'd like to just kind of ground us in how we're going to be conducting this conversation. We're going to be talking about it in 3 different levels of community, and where I'm going to be tackling it from as a first-year filmmaker is really opening up the question of, for someone who's just starting out, how do you even build community, and what does that even look like? Where do you find them? Because for me, CAAM was the very first organization that I was able to really build this community directly out of college. And so, yeah, I just wanted to open it up and have that conversation.
Okay, all right, here we go. So, before going into the film team, I've been thinking about this idea of community, and that being in the US in such an individualistic culture, us being in community is like the exact opposite of what we have been conditioned to be in a space where we are in competition, or we feel that there is some sort of us versus them and this illusion of separation. And that for us to actually thrive as artists and as filmmakers, we have to learn to be able to depend on one another. And that the idea that we can make these pieces of art in our own silos is both detrimental to the art itself, but it's detrimental to our souls and to us as a collective. And so in my own process of making my first feature documentary right now, and also my projects in the past, I had to be able to let go of these concepts of being so independent and thinking I could do everything self-sufficiently, instead being able to depend on others. And so figuring out, okay, what can I actually let go of and what can I delegate out, and where do I not have the skills that somebody else can help me? And so, for example, bringing on a cinematographer. I love cinematography, but I know it's not my forte. And so bringing in a team was super vital in that space. To start being able to like create the idea of the film that I had.
Is this okay? I mean, I think it just depends. So everyone's coming from different places and different experiences. So for me, I came into filmmaking. I had the privilege of growing up in a very strong, tight-knit Japanese American community in Los Angeles. Even specifically, was part of a youth group called Yellow Brotherhood in the Crenshaw area that was established in the late 60s to get Asian American youth off of drugs and out of gangs. So for me, I felt like I was coming already from a community, and so my purpose of like making films was to represent that community. And so I think, but since then I've realized that that's a very privileged experience. Not everyone is coming from even a community that they consider or they identify or even feel welcome to. But for me, I think it was very much coming to make films to showcase and to tell the stories of the community that I was very proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I think a place like, I think CAAM is, great example. And I think that, similar to what you just have both expressed, I mean, I think community first and then stories. And I think for me, it was like, when I did not go to film school, and I had a kind of passion for telling stories, but coming from an educational space of teaching young people to make films as a way to tell their stories, and then kind of, in a way, trying to build this foundational space where people could explore the craft while also building community at the same time. Because I think at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to do this solo. You're going to need, not only in the process of production, but release and all those things. So I think it's like almost always, for me, an idea of like, how do we start with the community and then kind of build the stories out of that space.
When I started thinking about making docs back in 2015, so the first thing I did was join everything. So I joined CAAM, I joined IDA, which is International Documentary Association, just thinking like, how can I meet people and just network that way, just to learn like, how do you even make a doc? And IDA is when I went to, it was because of IDA that I went to Getting Real, for instance, and I met Bowen there. And it was so wonderful because that's when ADOC was created, and I'll never forget that. So one of the first things was just joining everything and trying to attend whatever I could. And then the second thing was then when I was being paired up with the director, and so I'm mostly a producer. So I wanted to support films that I felt passionate about. And luckily at Cartemquin, which was a Chicago-based organization, which is where I lived at that time, was an organization that I could also be a part of. And that's how I met the different directors that I ended up producing. So, and that's how I met Colette, and that's how I met Lily. So I really could not have, well, maybe I would have eventually, but that's really where I found my first 4 films, was at Cartemquin. And it was because I just literally Googled documentaries in Chicago and found Cartemquin.
Yeah, and I also want to add that I also met the director of the film that I'm producing through the Cartemquin internship. We were both Cartemquin interns, and I think for me, when I first started out, all the people that I collaborate with are my friends and my people that I work with. And it just found out that we work so well together, and maybe we should do something, and maybe I can produce the project that you're directing. So that's a very natural progressive to find a team and collaboration.
All right. So going back into the broader idea of collaboration and community, where have you all felt like you've had to lean on your community in order to be able to tell the stories that you've wanted to tell? like that level of interdependence?
Well, I think that interdependence is beautiful, right? Because I think as a filmmaker, you're stepping up, and as a community-based filmmaker, at least, you're very accountable to your community. You're accountable to the people in your films. You're accountable to the people you're making it with, and you're accountable to the people that you're making it for. But then on the flip side, you also become a voice for that community. And so, like, for me, in a great way, I think maybe my first film is the only one that I came up with, and the rest, different people in the community was like, hey, this is a story, you should tell it. So I do think it's a great privilege to be able to be the one that, so for example, when Ben Kyoto, the manju shop was closing down, people were like, oh, someone should do it. Oh, maybe Tad should do it. And that's a huge privilege, but also a big responsibility. And I think that's great, though, to be able to get to that point. At the same time, again, reciprocal, I wouldn't have a career if it wasn't for specifically, the people I make it for, but it's also, CAAM, all the Asian American film festivals. So I do really think it's this reciprocal, the stories come from the community, the stories are told from the community, and the community is the one that sustains and holds up not only the film, but the filmmakers themselves.
Yeah, thank you. I think that with a lot of the stories that you're telling and that we're telling is this idea that there are these lines that I think are drawn between filmmaker, production, and the people that the stories are about. And I think I'm really interested in breaking those lines down. And I think looking at the possibilities that happen when we open up those lines of communication around literally what are the stories, kind of things that are happening in the story that we can learn from the people that are in the films. And I think that so many times people have, especially because the way the industry is set up, it's like you need to know everything that you're going to be doing in order to write all these applications. And as we all know, those things change all the time. So I think if we can go into the process being open to a true collaborative, relationship with folks that are in our films, and that's for, a lot of the more kind of, like you said, community-centered stories. I just have been really blown away by how much richer and deeper and authentic those films become when we try to sort of, in a way, kind of keep our egos in check and make sure that, as we're telling a story and being, kind of, we're pointing cameras at people and we're asking them to kind of be in front of us, and that we actually take that time to really build that connectivity. And I think what results are these much more richer films. And I think, yesterday's morning panel was really a beautiful example of that as well. I mean, you have these films that I think are much more, kind of deeper and more expansive because of that relationship. And I think for me, it's I'm really always learning from the films. I think that's really one of my favorite parts about being a documentary filmmaker is, you learn so much as you're making a film, and things that you kind of went in thinking were a particular way get kind of disrupted, and you're like, oh wow, how do I adjust to that and integrate that information in my process? So I really hope that people, are looking at the ways that kind of documentary has been structured, which I think is very, kind of extractive, colonialist, and even the term gaze, it's like you look at those kinds of terminologies that we use when we talk about doc filmmaking, and they are. I mean, the word subject, it's like, we need to kill that word. It's really not, respectful to call people subjects, and there's many reasons why that I won't go into now, but I think we understand those things are really kind of a way to keep us separated from the communities and the people, and I'm really excited to see kind of a new generation of filmmakers who I think are not really attached to that, and what could come out of that movement of younger filmmakers and filmmakers like us who have been doing, this filmmaking for so long, who are like, you know what, that doesn't really work for me, and because we weren't, like you said, you're raised in community. Storytelling is not like, something you're doing for clout, you know what I mean? It's something that's like you have to do it, you know what I mean? Like you don't have a choice. And so you want to embrace that connectivity rather than kind of like create barriers towards that connectivity.
I was just going to talk about what you said about subjects. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Subject. And it's actually a film about directors and how they dealt with subjects, but also the subjects themselves and the realities of what it was like to be in a documentary. And years later, like they had the folks from Hoop Dreams, like what the effects were of being part of that film years later. And I remember thinking, I wish I would have seen this when I started in 2016. So I really appreciate the idea that, like you were saying, that we're getting rid of the word subjects, that we're talking about what is the best way to approach a documentary and the folks in your film. And I learned a lot through the years, and I'm appreciative of CAAM because I think they were really, Gordon Quinn, who's the founder, what taught me a lot about being responsible. And when I made the first doc, we were about to picture lock, and he said, no, you really have to show it to your participants. And that was the scariest thing to do. But it was so meaningful. And so I'm glad that we're talking about this more. I'm still learning.
Yeah, I think this is how we're redefining the collaboration, right? Like not just within the filmmaking team, but also with the participants in the film, how we're collaborating with them to tell a story that's true to them. And I think in our previous conversation, we talked about the filmmaking process. It's also a way to build community. I don't know if, Kalea, you want to talk about how you build that group of supporters and people who really care about the film that you're making and the cause of your film through the filmmaking process. And also Rafael, because you're filming in Alaska and the Philippines for your film, that it's also building communities in those regions through this filmmaking process. And that I think in a way expands the concept of community, how we define community, and we're creating communities through filmmaking. Yeah, I don't know if you two want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yes. Okay. So when I first started my film, I started it back in 2017. And in the beginning, the film was very much focused on the political side of Mexico and Palestine, the border walls, and wanting to talk about my parents' own stories of escape. And so, because it was so focused on the political, I wanted the impact campaign to focus on the political. And so I started building an advisory board of organizations that were focused in the refugee space, in Palestine, and then also in the migration, like border walls, migration space. And this was how I started to be able to build community around the film before it was even finished. And I would highly recommend for anyone who is working on any projects to start thinking about these major themes of the film and who you can start connecting to from the beginning in pre-production, because it is so essential for when you do get to the finish line that you have already established these deep relationships for screenings and for the educational discussion guides if you want to do an impact campaign around the film. For me, that community came to use when I was doing different types of brain trusts. So for the impact campaign, we've been having regular, like quarterly meetings to talk about, okay, what are the different ideas that we could have for the impact campaign, them watching cuts of the film. So having that community involvement intertwined in the filmmaking process has been like a game changer for my film. The other big thing about community is also in the space of being around other filmmakers. And like what we're doing right now is so essential for us to continue the work of sustaining as filmmakers. It's just like getting to be around each other's energy is so inspiring. And I'm sure maybe we're all feeling this, like just getting to be with other artists that are really going against the grain of what we think life has to be like by just pursuing our art. It's super inspiring to be with you all. And so for me, I'm from Chicago, and there I didn't necessarily feel like I had a community for women of color specifically and non-binary filmmakers of color. And so in 2017, a friend and I, we had an event to try to get our folks together. And we had it at CineSpace, which is like the major production hub in Chicago. And over 70 people came to that event. And that became the first seed of community for women of color, which is now Mezcla Media Collective, which now has over 700 women involved in directing, editing, cinematography, that we have cultivated an organic community together because we knew that we needed to be able to rely on each other as a foundation. And so I know for myself, I've hired through Mezcla, I've been hired through Mezcla, and that we have become the backbone for one another. And so while it's important within the film team, it's also important in our ecosystem to be in collaboration with one another, to be able to pay it forward for each other's projects too. So those are the 2 points on my end. Thank you.
I think for me, with this very first short film that I'm making right now, because it is based out of Alaska and based out of the Philippines, and again, I didn't ever make a film before. I graduated hospitality. I thought I wanted to become a chef. I used to do a lot of caterings with my high school as well as my mom. But right before I went to college, my mom was like, maybe you can do something else. And I didn't ever realize what that something else was. Maybe it's what I'm doing now. So I say thank you to my mom for questioning what I was doing. But I think when it comes to what I'm doing now within the documentary field and building community, specifically as I, how I found my participant, it was through my work with the state of Alaska, and I didn't feel prepared to take on the work. I was actually very hesitant at the very beginning because of the amount of responsibility that it takes to be able to share somebody's story and to be able to do it with them and not just by myself and being behind the camera. So that was one of the first things that I had to really consider is, am I the right person to be able to share this story? And it was through long conversations, Zoom calls, because I'm not living in Alaska anymore. I'm actually based out of Philadelphia. So, we've got our time differences and we tried to work those out. And after probably 5 to 10 Zoom calls, I was convinced because our stories actually aligned much more than I expected. My participant, Alma Manabat Parker, migrated to the United States through her father, who joined the military when she was only 8 months old. I, on the other hand, it was also through my dad, but it wasn't through the military, it was through the cannery. He was sliming fish for the markets, about 18-hour work shifts a day, so I barely got to see him up until I was 8 years old. So 8 kept coming up over and over. But it was that migration story and being deprived of the opportunity to learn about our culture that ultimately brought us together. So when I finally went back to Ketchikan, Alaska, and had this type of conversation with her, whether we were moving forward or not, she finally asked me, would you want to go back to the Philippines with me? And I mean, how could I say no to that, right? But at the same time, I was still questioning, well, how am I going to do this? I've never created a film before. So I was targeted by an Instagram ad, I've said this so many times, by CAAM. And I applied. I applied to the fellowship, and I didn't hear back for a while. So I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm just gonna keep working through this. And by, I believe, February or March, I got an email from Sapna saying we would love to schedule an interview. And I was like, oh, I guess we're gonna be moving forward. And it's from this type of just, you gotta go for it, right? Like, I didn't feel ready, but I just knew that when the time came, I needed to be ready. Now, did I feel ready going back to the Philippines after having not been there for 15 years? Not really, but I needed to be ready. And I am so thankful that my participant brought me back to my home country. And that in itself, I think, building community in Alaska through my participant and her Filipino community in Ketchikan, and then going back to the Philippines and also building a community there is, the satisfaction that I was able to really get from this beyond just from the fear that I had going into it. So for those of you who are starting out, I say to you, please you may not be ready right now, but just go give it a try, and rejections will come. I've had a lot already, and I'm less than a year in.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's I want to give a shout out to ADOC, which is this amazing collective that has nurtured my career, and also Paulawi and Anu, who are in the audience right now, who has been my mentor and friends. And I think a lot of initiatives that we do at ADOC is to really nurture that cohort experience, how we can be there for each other. And when you need help, there's a community that you can reach out to. So like what Colette did with Metzka in Chicago, it's like, how can we build this network with each other? And this is community building in another way. And we build communities through filmmaking, but also we build community with each other in this community with others, and we learn from each other.
I would love to go to Bhavin about Next Doc too, and how you built that community, and what has that experience been like for both you, but then also the community in there too. Yes.
Yeah, well, shout out to Next Doc fellows that are here from a whole bunch of different years, and also Jude is a Next Doc fellow, Angelina Kinley, who will be here somewhere at some point, standing above the clouds. But yeah, I mean, I think we created, myself and the co-founder, Darian Henry, who were both also co-executive directors of Youth FX, because we're not seeing ourselves, represented in those spaces. And it's interesting. We were just talking about ADOC, and I think ADOC, BGDM, Next Doc, like literally around the same time. So there was definitely this cultural, consciousness that was happening in the doc space, where people were saying, this space doesn't look like us, and instead of waiting to kind of be, invited to a table, it was like, we're going to build our own, we're going to build our own spaces. And I think, you look 8 years later, and I mean, look at this room, look at ADOC, you just mentioned, look at BGGM. I think there's a lot of folks here who are part of that, network. Look at Mescla as another kind of iteration of that. But I think what is really kind of key about it is that it's not a project-based fellowship. It's really an artist development fellowship. And part of what we're centering is, how do you build a community of practice with other people where risk-taking is encouraged, and that you have kind of a place to fall back if you don't, make it. And it was so beautifully said, Raphael, just, kind of like fake it till you make it, like you got to just get in there and work through your process. But sometimes if you don't have a community, it can feel terrifying, and I think that what we've always really stressed with Next Doc is you're going to have ups and downs in projects and funding. And if you have a community there, then I feel like that's something that just keeps that motivation going, and you have people to call on. People have lived together, moved in together, been on each other's projects. I believe, Nash and Sonia, who are two fellows, worked on that little microdoc, were collaborators on that. And I think it's really beautiful to find a place where, you can build that level of relationship with each other that's really not based on where'd you go to school or what awards or all those kinds of things that I think are centered in the industry, but where it's really about, your intentionality of, reciprocity, and I think that I'll just say, as a filmmaker, I have learned so much as being part of, the Next Doc community as well. It's not like a top down, like I'm teaching and telling you what to do, but it's really bi-directional, you know. And it's interesting because when we started in 2016, I had just started working on a film that I finished in 2022 called Out of the Muck, which was, you know, a 7-year process that I started, like the first next doc in 2016, I showed like this little scene that we had just, you know, kind of like put together for a sample. You know, it wasn't even a sample reel yet or a work sample, it was just a scene. And then it was really cool to show in 2022 the full film, you know, and each year was like me just being fully transparent about this process is not easy, it takes a long time, you know. And I think so, you know, Next Talk has kind of been the space for people to really discover who they are as filmmakers, but who they are as people, you know, as they kind of come into the space, which, you know, it's for 21 to 25-year-olds, so your early adulthood too, you know. So I feel like we really try to, you know, make it a space where we build that kind of resource sharing. So we also have a gear lending program, we have a micro grant program. And so, you know, we try to say, what does it mean to kind of take away some of those barriers that exist to us telling our stories? So that's really what we're really kind of centering there.
I just wanted to mention, you know, I think we're talking about how great and strong and tight-knit a community is, and I think I've also been realizing, you know, I've been the benefactor of that, but I'm also realizing the tighter the community is, the more intimidating it could be. You know, people who, the three of you got selected as fellows, which means a lot of people weren't selected, you know, and I think we've all felt that way with film festivals getting rejected. So I think, you know, I think in the broader, to me, I feel like I can only do so much to necessarily control like the broader Japanese American community, but I feel like this Asian American documentary community, you know, I do feel like we should, and you know, so for example, working with Raphael has been really great because, you know, I premiered my first film at CAAM 20 years ago when I was Raphael's age, and I came from a very privileged, you know, both my parents are filmmakers, and it was still intimidating, and it was still hard, and I think, you know, Raphael has been sharing, you know, his experience, and, you know, like Raphael's a go-getter, you know, and it's still very intimidating, and it's still hard, so I can imagine people who aren't go-getters. So I just, you know, want to say, like, for all of us who you either feel, you know, new, young, or even excluded, not welcome, I mean, I think I've personally felt that way too in different spaces, and I think we've all felt that way. And so, you know, I would say to all of us who do feel like we're in part of the group or in, you know, in the mix, to remember what it felt like and how intimidating that was, and to really kind of keep that in mind when meeting, you know, people who are new. And then to the people who feel like they're emerging or young, you know, I think this is a great community, and I think it could be, you know, we could always work to be better. I think all of us need to make sure we all created these institutions, these organizations to break these gatekeeping dynamics, but we got to make sure that we don't become gatekeepers ourselves. And, you know, and at the same time, you know, I think all of us, we also have to remember who the real enemy is. And I think all of us can be better, we can be critiqued, but I think in the larger scheme of things, to remember that, you know, organizations that are here to support us. But I do think, you know, just, it can't, like, trust me, I know what it feels like to be, I mean, this room is still intimidating to walk into, right? To introduce yourselves, to go to a screening, to introduce yourself to the director. And so, you know, I just want to say that I really understand how that feels. It is scary. It is very intimidating. But all I could say is, you know, just try to push yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone. But I do think that because the community is so receptive, that I think if you just, you know, focus on the work, and make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, you know, eventually it is a small community. Reputations do spread quickly. And I think if you're, you know, for the right reasons, I think eventually, you know, people will know who you are. But I just want to say I understand what it feels like to not necessarily be included. And I think we all need to keep that in mind.
I would just add to that there's also this beauty, specifically in our like the documentary space, that I feel like a lot of us, there's just so much deep heart. I would say the majority. The majority are in this for a deep soul purpose, and that there is a lot of heart. And that while it can be like this very intimidating space, recognizing that like many of us are doing this because we have deep feelings of compassion and love for our communities. And so just, I guess, like remembering that in the background, that like whenever you are starting to feel that level of intimidation or, I'm not meant to fit in, or maybe they're gonna judge me, that there's something so special about being in the documentary community, that I felt so much deep compassion and love that I haven't felt in other spaces. That just like remembering that like we're here to help as much as we can versus seeing it as a competition once again. Yeah.
We're not here to replicate the
Correct.
industry, right? We're here
Correct.
to disrupt and create something new.
Correct.
I think I want to talk about the importance of mentorship. Tad is my mentor, and it's been, again, only maybe 2 months that we've been working together. And the thing that really resonated with me during the interview that he said was, regardless of how intimidated or, shoot, what's the word that you use? It's another I word. But anyway, it's, regardless if you are intimidated, if you are insecure, as long as you are secure in the story that you want to tell, you can do it. And that is the shift that happened to me during that interview that made me want to go get it even more. Like, I've got a community in Alaska who Filipinos make up the largest minority group of the state, but yet when I share with folks outside of the state, they're very confused that Filipinos are in Alaska. So then I have to go and continue to tell this story. It's because our story is not a part of the narrative, of the greater American narrative. And it is in that I find strength from what Tad told me that I believe is what's bringing me to where I am today. And I share this with all of you, that it takes mentors to be able to come to that type of realization. So there are like some people in the audience right now, and one of them is PJ Raval. I watched every single one of your videos, and I've wanted to reach out to you on Instagram so many times, but I felt so intimidated. And I share this with all of you because it takes these moments in our lives to open up and let go of these fears, to open up to the people that we look up to and build these relationships and build these connections that may otherwise go unnoticed. So find that mentor, reach out to that mentor, and share that you are intimidated by them, but at the same time, I want to make that connection. So find that mentor.
Yeah. I was going to say too, I'm naturally an introvert, and so like being intimidated in a space like this was always my first reaction. I was like, oh my God, I have to talk to people, and it's really hard. But I have found, I like I said, I just started in 2015, 16, that the doc community is just one of the most generous community, and I feel so lucky to be part of it. And even though I'm older than all these people, Grace Lee, Don Young, people, Leo and Renee, people who have been pioneers in the doc world, PJ, have always been so willing to talk to me. I remember someone said, you have to contact Grace Lee, and I'm going, I don't know how to reach her. And then she was behind me. I don't know if she remembers. It was at Getting Real, and she was willing to meet with me. Jean Chen, again, I'm older than everyone, but to me, they're my mentors, and I appreciate the hard work they continue to do on behalf of us. So yeah, it's intimidating, but I feel so lucky that we have this group around us.
And that's what I mean, I think, in terms of, trying to create something new here. Like, I think a lot of things, whether it's intentional or not, is modeled behavior, and I think for me, similar, like, CAAM is, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for CAAM, or even specifically, Don Young has been a huge mentor of mine. Sapna has been with, this whole time. And subconsciously, I think, because like Don, was producing the Jake Shimabukuro film, I think I was barely I was like 29. That was my first feature, and really like, kind of like, similar to Raphael, like kind of deer in the headlights, like, oh my, I'm not ready, but I need to be ready. But subconsciously, I find myself telling Raphael or telling some of the other younger folks kind of verbatim little things that Don told me. So I do think that the more we can mentor each other, that taught me that that's what you do. When you get your shot, when you get to a certain, comfortability, a certain, point of privilege and resources, that's the next step is to help other people. So I think those little things versus, this like competitiveness, like, oh, I think that's again exactly what we're trying to disrupt. But just, want to say for everyone out there, you don't have to be in this organized fellowship to be mentored or to be a mentee. But I think so. I would encourage everyone, just to really try to reach out to people. I think if you feel like you've gotten a certain level of exposure, really kind of bring on people and really, share those resources.
Yeah, I just want to add, before Diane became my mentor, she was already being a mentor to me, that I would be like, I have this question, I don't really know the answer. Maybe I just email Diane. And she will always be responsive and trying to help. And I think that's, like Tad mentioned, that a lot of times all it takes is just emailing and asking for help. And I think that's why I'm so grateful for this community, is that there's always someone who's willing to give their advice and opinions to help you if you have a question. And I think we have about 10 minutes left, so we would like to open up to see if anyone has any questions for us, or the mentees and mentors.
This is for Colette. You mentioned that you have quarterly brain trust meetings. I was wondering how you set that up, how you got people on board with that, what that looks like.
Yes. So, okay. So, in the beginning, in 2017, I brought on like a student intern to help me start doing research of organizations. So we made like a list of like 200 orgs in the US and abroad that were like focusing on these different themes. And then we just started cold emailing, introducing the film to them. Would they be interested in learning more? And I should not have added this, but I also offered to have calls with everyone. And so there was a lot of interest, which was amazing. And yet I was like, oh, what did I do to myself? So I scheduled it out for the next few months of having different calls with different organizations and seeing who would be interested in coming on board. And of course, there were organizations that could be more involved and then less involved. So some were like, yeah, we can add it to our newsletter when it's done. Or they were like, yeah, we would love to be part of watching cuts and being part of an official advisory board. So I guess it whittled down to maybe, I don't know, maybe we have 15 to 20 now that are really involved and that we're planning this screening campaign with. And so in terms of the quarterly meetings, I have I give them updates of where the film is at, what our goals are for it. That right now we're in the edit, we're in post, so we've just been talking about where we're at with that and then inviting them to virtual feedback screenings. And we're just starting actually thinking about the discussion guides for the impact campaign and what the components will be like. So starting to think through that as well with them. Yeah, do you have anything else? Yeah? Yes, please.
It's a huge time commitment, so how are you compensating people, and are you incorporating their feedback into your cut?
Yes. So unfortunately, I don't have that compensation for them yet. Except when we once we get impact funding, I would love to be able to have stipends for those who have been helping on that role. And the other part of the question, yeah, it's gone. Well, could you repeat it again?
Are you incorporating their feedback?
Yes. Yes, I am. Yes, it's been like essential, and it's been amazing because it's like the first time that like Latinos and Arabs are like coming together to talk about these different things, and they're like, whoa, intergenerational trauma, and like how overlapping and in solidarity our stories and struggles are. And so it's been really amazing to see them figuring out like, oh, how can we start to unite our efforts and like have joint screenings and like bring our communities together. So it's been really, really cool. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, so grateful to be able to be doing this work of building that bridge.
Any other questions? Okay, then I'm gonna talk. Yeah, so I think I think it's something that Colette said that actually sparked something that I was thinking too, that your film is about two communities, and it's not just Asian American, but also your Mexican community, your mother's side of the family. And I think this is actually a question for Diane that I had. It's that as a producer, you not only work on Asian American stories, but you work on a lot of themes and films that touch not just Asian American, but other communities. I think it's also a way that when we're telling the story, especially for the film that I'm producing right now, it's a lot of communities within a neighborhood that there are issues centered around religion. And when we're making films, it's also bridging those communities together. And I think, Diane, your work, and especially as a producer, that has done a lot of that. I don't know if you can elaborate a little. I don't know if that's...
Well, I would say like the films that aren't Asian necessarily specific, for instance, like Minding the Gap, it was about an issue, more about generational trauma. So it was more thinking about these young people and how do we address the issue, and being as mindful of them and their experiences, these young people, versus necessarily one was Black or one was white and one's Asian. So the same with like Breaking the News last year, which was about a digital newsroom created by women and LGBTQ communities for those communities. Like, how do you write stories? How do we rethink the newsroom to reflect these communities, and how will stories be different if it's from the lens of women than a legacy newsroom, which is 90% men or editors. So it's, I guess I'm not having to focus on like what Colette's doing, like trying to bring in two very diverse communities, your mom's community and your father's community. But it's just like making sure every voice is heard, because it's more issue-oriented versus community-based, or racially based.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to get is that when we're making films, there's a solidarity between people of color communities, and I think like the CAAM Firelight Initiative, Homegrown, it's not just about Asian, it's about the common struggles as people of color communities that we're facing together, and there's such a big intersection of what we do, and especially in this documentary field, that we can build something together and build communities through that way. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Okay, I will pass the mic to Seth. Kevin, yeah.
I was just curious, so like the title of the talk is Film is Collaboration, and it seems like everyone's working on a project that's sort of like very centered in a community, but like with the film, sort of like your goal is probably to get it to go beyond just that community as the audience, and that sort of necessitates interacting, working with folks that are not, maybe don't get it. And I'm wondering, I'm curious for you all if you could talk about any experiences. How do you bring those people around? Like, how do you bring those people that don't get it to get it, and still sort of like have the film be successful and have meet the goals that you want? Yeah, just curious any thoughts on those, that issue.
I mean, actually, that's glad you reminded me the title of the panel. I forgot. No, but I think that's actually a great question, because I do think your audience and who you're making the film for is crucial, and I think you should know that to begin with. And I think will determine what your fundraising strategy is, what your distribution strategy, but probably also more important, who's going to be on your team, who you're going to collaborate with. So I probably the wrong person to answer that question, because I specifically make films for my own community, and I think for the Nobuko Miyamoto film, I think it was great that Wing Wenlei also we say eye to eye on that same, so it wasn't too much of a conflicting issue when it comes to, okay, are they going to get this? Do they need to get this? So I do think that's really important, is to really identify who your audience is, project by project, but also too, I think for me it's been very helpful just as a filmmaker to kind of know what that audience is, and therefore, but I think maybe there's other people who can talk about getting it to a broader audience, because I don't really do that.
Say something? Yes, I agree. And I think that there's like a paradox in this idea that the more that we try to convince or try to prove ourselves to people outside of a community, the less the message gets through. That like the more that we're trying to mold ourselves into a box that is palatable for broader audiences, that we are doing ourselves and our communities a disservice in that way. And so doing things for our community first, in that level of like very personal, intimate space within our community, gives people that universality that would not be there if we were trying to make it more broad. And so I think that I agree that this film, like for me, it's for first generation children of immigrants, refugees, mixed kids, that kind of thing. And yet I also see that I would love to have it be in spaces like PBS, like Hulu, like being able to get it onto platforms where there are broader audiences that are going to be able to see it as well. And especially with Palestine as like such a controversial topic, like I would love for this to be able to start generating conversations that are super needed right now to give context to what's happening in Gaza, and that it probably will get heated, and yet making sure that I am able to put it at the forefront, and yet telling it through my father's story and through my father's escape. That like there's that level of intimacy that will allow people to feel the heart and the personal. Mm-hmm.
I guess for me, the film that I'm producing, it's about young people, and the audiences are young people. So it's really trying to give the young people in the film agency to tell the story, and also the length of the film, we're talking about maybe making different shorts that fit for social media so that it can reach different audiences throughout the Impact campaign. And also, it's also about education. Then we're talking about strategic distribution, that maybe we do educational distribution, we carve out that part of the rights so that teachers can use this in their classroom. And also making sure there's teacher's guide, how do you talk about religion in class? And for parents, how do you talk about religion in the family with your kids? So it's really tailored different materials based on your film to reach the audience, and also how we're editing the film, making sure that it's accessible, don't have a lot of talking heads, maybe really giving the kids the space to talk instead of having a bunch of experts explaining what the situation is. So that's my perspective in terms of how to reach the audience as a producer, that I would constantly be having those kind of conversations with the director that I'm working with, and making sure that, because we featured Asian American communities in the film, how can I making sure that in those conversations the values from our community is not lost when we're making the film.
I think where my film currently is, I need to address my Alaska audience and then the broader audience. And I say that because even in Alaska itself, Filipinos are not recognized. And there's actually a group that just formed right now where they're lobbying to get Asian American studies. Similar, that's what's happening in Ohio, I think, from the last presentation. So our plan right now is to be able to partner with them and have it included into the way that they're teaching into the school curriculum. So we're looking into that partnership right now, and into the broader audience, since I live in Philadelphia, is more so building relationships with the Filipino organizations there first, and then going to the larger National Filipino American Association conference in Houston. So it's a lot of work trying to build up relationships to be able to get the film into a broader audience.
Thank you, everyone. I will pass the mic to Sapna.
All right, thank you so much. Please give another wonderful round of applause to our fellows and mentors. Thank you so much. That was such a rich and heartening, heartwarming conversation. Thank you so much. And that is the final panel for Summit. I know this is the afternoon lull. Grab some, Nguyen iced coffee and our other chai teas available back there. I just wanted to remind you that we do have our Warner Brothers Discovery panel at 2 p.m. Let's see, what else? Oh, and I also wanted to remind you, I've been told that we need more people to RSVP for our Filmmaker brunch tomorrow. If you're planning on going and haven't hit the RSVP button, please do so. It's here tomorrow morning at 11, I believe, something like that, 10:30, 11, brunch time. Yeah, please check out all of our screenings this afternoon. Nobuko Miyamoto is screening at 5. Correct. And then all the other wonderful screenings from filmmakers that were on the panel yesterday. Again, there's office hours happening from 2 to 4 at our SF Film Building, and our WBD panel is here at 2. Yeah, and that is a wrap for Summit 2024. Thank you so much to our ADOC programming partners. I think Betsy is in the SF Film offices, but thank you to Betsy, who is the program lead, Leilani back there, Melody Gao, Gary, PJ, all of the people who might be intimidating to go up to. Please go up and talk to them. And thank you so much to our fellowship cohort again. I loved having you. Finally, thank you so much to our ASL interpreters. They'll be here. Stephanie Chow on stage and Christine. Thank you so much for your hard work. All right, enjoy more snacks. And we have a little break before the next panel at 2. Thank you.